Psalm 19. Last time we talked about the commands of the Lord are clear, giving insight for living, and now the whole, not the whole thing, but once David finishes writing about the wonder of creation and how it calls us to, it directs us to the Creator. Then he talks about the law, and the commands of the Lord are clear, giving insight for living. That's the last part of verse 8. And then in verse 9 he says, reverence for the Lord is pure, lasting forever. Well, I would love it if my reverence for the Lord was absolutely pure, and if it never went away, if it lasted forever. But in my life, there's, and I tend to be critical of myself, and you probably do, of yourself as well. One of the things I notice about myself is there's just not very much about me that's pure. There's almost always there's this little, sometimes not even little, but a tainting of my motives. There's some thing, a little twist or a bend or and honestly, even my reverence is often not pure. Well, that's too harsh. That is, on my best day, my reverence is pure. It's all about what makes reverence pure in the first place. Well, I think it's that my reverence is both emotional and intellectual. And when those two things come together, the focus is on God, or the one I have reverence for. All right. Occasionally, sometimes I am able to get there. A lot of times, though, I got these other things out here barking at me and tugging on me. No, that's just part of the human condition. That's life. So, when my heart and mind are turned toward God, well, that's probably the most pure I'm gonna get. I wish that state would last forever. Now, here, one of the things about the foreverness of this is God will forever deserve reverence. And then he goes to, well, that's the next sentence. The laws of the Lord are true, each one is fair. Now, we have to frame this up in reality. The laws of the Lord are true. God didn't just arbitrarily create these 360 some individual laws, and this is what David is talking about, and think to himself, let's really give it to him. All of those laws, each one of those regulations of the law was for the benefit of Israel. And so when David reflects on the law, part of, and maybe the biggest first part of what he sees is, this is God giving us what is truly best for us on the basis of what is true. The laws of the Lord are true. Each one is fair. Well, what makes something fair? Well, we have a lot of, in our culture, I think we have a lot of confusion about what's fair. Well, everybody should get the same thing. That's fair, right? So if you show up, you should get a trophy. Sorry, but I have a problem with that. um, is everyone equal? Yes. And in God's sight, everyone has equal value. He loves all of us equally. Do all of us achieve equally? And on the basis of our achievement, do we deserve the consequences of achievement? Not equally. That's not fair. What's fair, really, is when you produce and achieve at a certain level, an established level, then you experience the positive consequences of your achievement. But if you don't achieve, then okay. Then there's this. If I don't attempt, if I don't engage in order to achieve, is it fair that I would receive the same outcome, the same consequence as the person who did make effort for that? Okay. But God's laws are fair. And one of the things that makes anything fair is that everybody is playing under the same construct. In other words, we're all playing by the same rules. Well, one of the things that makes God's laws fair is that they apply to everyone. In David's day, when he was king of Israel, there was a time or two when he tried to live beyond the law. You know his story, and I'm sure probably like me, one of the very first things that comes to mind is Bathsheba. He knocked her up, and then he had her husband murdered to cover his sin. He might have called it in those days, early in those days, indiscretion, but it was a sin. And he discovered, he found out, you can't, nobody lives above the law. Either you abide by the law or it breaks you. And then he, in verse 10 says, the laws, are more desirable than gold, even the finest gold. Wow, it takes a unique perspective and attitude to find the law more desirable than fine gold. For me, here's my experience. When the law works in my favor, very desirable. But when I don't get what I want because of the law, not very desirable. I don't think I'm the only one that deals with this. And I'm not necessarily being critical, but what I am saying is David, as he writes in Psalm 19, his heart is committed to and in love with God, and because of that, his law. More desirable than gold? I'm going to ask a kind of a personal question here. What is the most desirable thing right now in your life? And another way for me to ask that is, what is the thing you most desire right now in your life? Oh, it could be a whole lot of things. I know. I see this on Facebook, which I look at way too often. But one of the things is, I just want to be happy and at peace. Well, okay. You know, the route to happiness and peace is not a happy, peaceful route. You don't get those things without conflict and effort. And often, in my experience, sadness. What if, last time I used this phrase, and to me it's a pivotal phrase in my walk with Christ, is, what if my compelling singular desire, the one desire above all others, was to organize my life around God's design and join Him by His grace in living that kind of life. They're more desirable than gold, even the finest gold. They are sweeter than honey, even honey dripping from the comb. I've said it in lots of different ways before, but I have to be honest and say, they're not always sweet as honey. Sometimes the law is a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow. Because what I want is sometimes not what God wants. And when that happens, how do I know what God wants? Well, from the law, is it one primary way? I think what David is saying here, what he's setting up, is a concept that says God's design for my life is for my best. And when I live in that way, that's when the best things happen in my life. I find that to be true. Well, let's move on. And verse 11, they're a warning to your servant, a great reward for those who obey them. Now, a warning. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to think about and look at the idea of a warning. One is, don't make me come down there. I'm warning you. I will take my belt off. That kind of thing, right? Well, there's another kind of warning. It says, hey, there is danger here. Warning, danger. Kind of like the robot in Lost in Space, right? Danger, Will Robinson, danger. Well, God's law serves as a warning against danger. And he says it's not just a warning, but there's a great reward for those who obey them. I'll say yes to that. That's been my experience. I'm not great at obeying them yet, but through discipline and effort by God's grace, yes, there is a reward, and more than a reward. There are rewards for living according to God's design. And now, that points up a thing that I don't have time to talk about this time, but I will next time. Let's talk about the law this side of the cross. Because that's not the perspective David had of the law. We'll talk about that next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.